Welcome to our Sound for Video session. It is the 23rd of June, 2016. And in this session, we're going to answer questions that many of you submitted. So let's go ahead and dive in. Again, focus is sound for video. Our first one is from Sean. Our first one is from Sean Kelly. Let me just read to you kind of a little bit of his background and then his questions. First of all, thank you so much for the documentary. He shot recently a documentary film. He used the Audio-Technica AT875R as a shotgun microphone. He had a wired lavalier microphone. All this was recorded with a Tascam DR70D as the audio recorder. And then he also took that out of the Tascam into a Panasonic GH4 to record the audio. So he has the reference audio recorded on the camera, but it was fed from the Tascam, so it should be good, solid reference audio. Let's see here. Interviewed a bunch of people. Here are his questions. Since the GH4 breaks up long video into multiple files, but the Tascam does not, what is the best way to link the one audio file with its corresponding 5 to 6 video files? That's a great question. And I think the trick is that if you're using Premiere Pro should be able to figure that out. You're not going to link the 5 separate video files to a single audio file all at once. The difference is you need to do each of them separately and then splice them together in your timeline, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is you'll take the first video file, then you will take the audio file, sync those up, and the audio file will be much bigger, and it will only sync, the video will only sync to the very first part of that audio file, but that's fine. Then you just chop off the rest of the audio, get rid of that. And then you do a similar type thing for the second audio file, so on and so forth. So you'll end up with 5 separate files, and then you just put them right next to each other on the timeline, and you can edit from there. So that's the first thing. Now, Premiere should be able to match those up, especially in the light of the fact that you recorded your audio with a Tascam, but then also sent a line out of the Tascam into your GH4. So those should work together pretty nicely. They should be able to sync up. If they don't, unfortunately, you will have to manually sync those. But what that is, that's just a matter of zooming in really close on the two and lining up the waveforms as best you can. So that can still get you great results. It's just a little bit more time consuming. So I hope that makes sense, Sean. That was a great question there. Second one, if someone raises their voice and it starts to clip, how do you replace the audio track with the lower safety track, since the higher audio track should already be linked with the video? And when do you do that in the edit? So just to make it clear here, what I may not have mentioned before is that this was actually recorded with the safety track feature on the DR70D. That is to say, the microphone input was recorded at the regular gain level plus at a lower gain level on a separate track or separate channel. And the question he has is, well, how do I go to the safety track if I need to, if someone gets really loud and it clips on the main track? So that depends on your workflow, and there are a lot of ways you can do it. I can tell you that for larger projects, which it sounds like this probably is, that's typically done in Audition. You can do it in Premiere, and I think it could just work just as fine, just as well. But some people prefer to take it into Audition. In any case, I assume that when you recorded with a Tascam, first we'll check this assumption to make sure it works. When it recorded the 2 tracks, it recorded them into the same file, just on different channels. So let's start with that assumption. What you can do is when you do sync those up, you'll have both of them, and you'll just mute one of them, or you'll cut out the pieces you don't need from the safety track and just have the main audio. And then what you can do is what I would probably do is just mute that channel altogether until you find a spot where you need to actually cut in and use the safety channel instead, or the safety track, and then unmute that channel, get rid of the stuff you don't need, and keep the safety track part that you do need, and then cut out the corresponding piece from the main track where it did clip and you want to get rid of it. So that's one way you can do it. I actually find if your clipping is not too bad, if it's not too extreme, there is a way to fix it in both Adobe Audition has this feature, and then I also use Isotope RX. You can actually repair that to some extent. Now, in the past, that wasn't possible, and so you wanted to avoid clipping at all costs. Nowadays, you can actually repair it if it's not too extreme, and it works pretty well. So that's another option too. You could just keep the primary production track and use the declipping feature both in Adobe Audition or in my case, I use RX. So hopefully that helps on that one. And then the very last one, I tried my best to minimize noise using your techniques. Let me just highlight this here. Follows on YouTube and also purchased the tutorial. But sometimes you could hear ambient noise coming from the hotel lobby or the hotel air conditioner. Not bad, but where do I look for audio editing techniques? I figure this will be close to the last step in the edit. Well, I've done some things on the YouTube channel, and in fact, there are some denoising tutorials out on YouTube, both for Adobe Audition and for Audacity. You're welcome to follow those. Those would probably be the most likely techniques I would use in this case. And now that you've already done the shot, that's really kind of your only option. During shots, usually what I do is, in as much as possible, it sounds like you're in a hotel lobby or in a hotel room. Sometimes you don't have this option, but what I typically will do, or at least ask the director if I'm working with someone else to do, is I will actually ask during the shoot itself, not when you're getting set up, but actually when you start rolling, to first turn off the air conditioner, just so you don't have to fight with that in post, just for the future reference. And I've actually done that before, and I've also unplugged refrigerators and unplugged freezers and unplugged other things that were making noise. And then what you can do is turn them back on as soon as you're done with that clip. So you don't want people to get too uncomfortable and too sweaty, but typically, and again, it depends here. I mean, if you did an hour-long interview, that could get kind of uncomfortable. But just something to keep in mind as well. So that was a great question. Thanks for those. I appreciate those. Let's hop back on over to, we had a ton of questions actually this time. This is over at the Google Plus site, and here was my posting here, soliciting for your questions, and we got a lot of great ones. I hope we can cover most of them here. It looks like we're already several minutes in. So in any case, positive color. Hi, Curtis, good idea. I need a field recorder and can't decide between the Tascam DR60 Mark II and the Zoom H5. I think the Tascam has a wee bit better sound quality. On the other hand, the Zoom has better ergonomics, includes a mic. For some kind of recordings, it's more convenient. Can also be used as an audio interface. It needs only 2 AA batteries. I know both units can be powered using an external battery, but sometimes it's a hassle carrying and attaching it to the unit, especially if you're recording Foley. I know the Zoom has its cons, like it's not very intuitive and no power, direct phantom power buttons, etc. My question is the audio difference between them as obvious as, or seems like the Zoom is the best option in this case? Thanks in advance. Well, positive color, it looks, sorry, it sounds almost like you kind of made up your mind, and that's fine. I would say go with what you think makes sense. The Zoom H5 is a fine recorder, and if you feel like the ergonomics are going to work better for you, by all means go for it. I think audio quality-wise, those two aren't that different. And in fact, some people actually like the Zoom sound a little bit better. The Zoom sound actually does tend to have a little bit more low end to it, just slightly. I don't think it's a bad choice. So if you're thinking like the Zoom H5 will work better for you, then I support that. Go for it. All right. Next one up is from Domingo Sana, and he had a really tough question that I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer, but I'll try. Excellent, Curtis. Thanks for the initiative and the opportunity. I'm interested in the step-by-step list of mandatory action, like noise reduction, to post-processing audio using Adobe Audition CC, and the optional actions, like a de-esser, for example. You covered some of those in the past in your videos, but I think knowing the order of these actions would avoid mistakes. For example, if you use isotope dynamic compressor prior to using press work, it could be a mistake, or maybe using noise reduction prior to DC repair DC offset is not correct. I think you got the main idea behind my question. Regards and thanks again. Domingo, I definitely have an understanding, I believe, of your question. Let's open up Adobe Audition here. I'm going to pull in an audio file here. Let's get some raw audio, and we'll take this one. I'm actually going to cut some of this out because this is longer than we need to do our, for illustration purposes. I'll actually cut out more of it and cut that out. Okay, here is our audio. Let me kind of show you what I've learned so far, Domingo. I'm not here to suggest that this is the ultimate way to do this, but this is how I do that. All right, so I have an audio clip here, straight dialogue. There are a couple of things here. Let me just show you what I do and in the order that I do them. And to be honest, I'm going to go over into RX because I'm more comfortable there. These same principles can apply. Oh, it looks like I just upgraded to Adobe Audition CC 2015.3 last night, and it would appear that it has removed my my plugins. I have to go back in and set up my plugins. Let's do that. We may as well. People are asking about this all the time, so I'm going to scan for plugins. And it's going to take this a couple seconds to figure that out. While it's doing that, let me kind of just talk through kind of my general approach. I've talked a little bit in the past about asymmetric waveforms, and you can see these actually are a little bit asymmetric. That is to say, they're the peaks on the lower or the bottom portion of the waveform actually extend, have a greater amplitude than those on the top. So for example here, this one's peaking at about minus 17, I would say, and this is peaking at minus 11, maybe even closer to 10. So they're a little bit asymmetric. So I think we should be able to do this now. Let's do this restoration here. We got it. Okay. So I'm heading over into, I'm going to take the audio over into RX. All right, the first thing I do is I try to get that straightened up a little bit. Now, this is not mandatory to do it in this order, but this is what I typically do, just because I can get a sense for where my loudness sits. So I will process that. Okay, you can see that straightened it up a little bit in terms of making it a little bit more even above and below. The next thing I'll typically do is go in and I will check to see where my loudness sits. You can see right now I'm at minus 36.7 LKFS or LUFS, and my true peak is at minus 11. So I want to get this maybe up into I try to get into the minus 26 to minus 24 range to do the majority of my audio processing. That's just because I'm used to working in that range. Whoops, that's not going to work. I don't have that much headroom. I'm going to go minus 26. Okay, so minus 26. So you'll see what happens when we do that. It is processing through there. Okay, so now you can see we can see the waveform a little bit better. One of the things you'll notice here is I have these breaths in between. And I realize I'm going to be doing some things here that are not available natively in Adobe Audition. I ask you to kind of stick with me on this, and just so you can understand what I'm doing. A lot of this you can do in Adobe Audition, however, but I have these better tools, and they're not better in terms of necessarily in terms of audio quality, but they're really good in terms of they have some functionality that makes things a little bit easier for me. So let me just show you what I mean. So that's the first thing I do there. Now, one of the things I'll do here is I'll probably go ahead and do some debriefing. So if I play through this, heard called foam core, did you hear that breath in between those phrases there? I like to get rid of those, not get rid of them, but reduce them a little bit because they're a little bit distracting and they don't sound awesome. So what I do is I come here to my plugin, and I'm going to go to the iZotope breath control. This is actually Nectar. This is not part of RX. It's another iZotope product. But what I'll typically do here is I'll probably reduce those breaths by about 9 dB. Watch what happens when I play through this. You'll see up here it will indicate where it's kind of reducing the volume of the breaths. Heard called foam core. There's one sort of poster board with foam in the middle and then a ply of white on the top and another ply on the back. You can buy it in lots of different colors. In this particular, so you can see it's kind of attenuating them whenever it detects a breath. It's pulling them down a little bit in sort of an automated fashion. Awesome plugin, love it. Been using it quite a lot. So I'll go ahead and process that. And that was pretty quick. And you can see now, just from a visual standpoint, you can see the breaths are a lot smaller now in the waveform. So that's the next thing I'll do. If I need to do any sort of like a high pass filter, I really like using this digital corrective EQ, which is a linear phase EQ, to do any sort of high passing. So if there's any sort of noise in the room, sort of low frequency noise, I should say, I'll go ahead and do this here, and let's process and see if it makes any difference here. Didn't make a huge visual difference, and it's probably not going to make a huge difference in terms of the sound, but that's one thing I do as well sometimes, and this is where I'll do that. The next thing I'll typically do is if I need to do any sort of noise reduction, I'll do that here, and I use the denoise plugin. This is awesome in here. And I'm not trying to sell RX because it's super, super expensive, and it's, it's best for people that are doing lots of processing. But makes it super evil. I can actually just process it. I know in almost all cases I'm going to do, actually I'll probably pull this down. I do somewhere around about 6 reduction. That's 6 dB, I believe. And leave the threshold pretty much at the default. This algorithm actually automatically learns your noise profile and does automatically the noise reduction. It's awesome, and it's very transparent. So I'll just go ahead and apply that. You'll notice something here. When I do that, sometimes, and I didn't really notice it as much here, but sometimes with some waveforms, it will make the waveforms become asymmetric again. If that happens, I just come right back in here into the channel ops and do the adaptive phase rotation again. Same thing that Presswork does that I'd showed in a previous one that you'd mentioned. And then from here, I would come in and I would do any sort of compression. Whoops, that's the loudness. I would do the compression. So I'd come back in here, switch over to the Dynamics plugin. I actually have a preset that I use, which is actually a dual band, which I use for dialogue. So we're at minus 26 dB, or sorry, LUFS for loudness right now, and I probably want to get closer to minus 19.5 for a mono file. Minus 19, minus 19.5, somewhere in there. So that means I've got to get, somewhere around 8 dB of headroom. So I've got to reduce these transients by about 8 dB. So I'm probably going to set my threshold to about, if I go here to minus 13, I'm mostly just affecting transients, which will be okay. So I'm going to set it right there, minus 13. Now, again, since I'm just affecting transients, I can do a 3-to-1 ratio. I'm good with that. I keep just a little bit of a knee, which softens it kind of makes a curve. Instead of kicking in right at 13, it kind of gradually kicks in. And then I'll also play through and see it kind of visually where to set the higher frequency. So at about 3K, I apply a different type of, not a different type of compression, but different compression with a different threshold, and pretty much all the rest the same settings. So what I do is I do this visually, and what I'll do is I'll preview it here, and I'll actually watch to see how much reduction it's doing. This is to cut down on sibilance, because if you just compress with a single band compressor, you can start to kind of emphasize sibilance, because here's why. Let me just sort of do a preview here and then stop it, and I'll show you something. Now, if you want to do lighting for a product style shot like this, if you like this, hopefully this is something that will be helpful for you. If you'll notice there's a lot more energy in the, say, 100 to 3K range than there is in the 3K and up range. So what that means is that the loudest stuff is usually going to be the lower frequency stuff, and that's the stuff that's going to get compressed. So if we're compressing all the low energy stuff and then bringing everything up, what's going to happen is suddenly these higher frequencies are going to sound quite a bit louder than they were in the original recording. And what that means is the sibilance, all that sort of S energy, is going to get emphasized a little bit. So what I'm doing here is I'm running through here, and I want to compress this with a lower threshold than I would with the lower frequency material. And hopefully that makes sense. Let me show you here. Now, if you want to do lighting for a product style shot like this, if you like this, hopefully this is something that will be helpful for you. If you hate this look. Okay, so what you'll notice here, what I'm doing is I'm moving the threshold up and down, and I'm trying to get it so that when the S, when the dialogue contains some S energy, that it's compressing that, and it compresses it is when it turns red here and you see the little bars come down here. That means it's compressing at that moment. And those are the only things I really want to compress up here. And so I'm kind of moving this up and down to kind of tune it so it's just capturing the S's and just compressing those. Here's some more. Now, if you want to do lighting for a product style shot like this, if you like this, hopefully this is something that will be helpful for you. If you hate this look, please watch this video so you know exactly what not to do. Okay, so there we go. I think the minus 24.5 is going to work well for us. These are the same settings that we have virtually for the lower frequencies as well. So we'll go ahead and process that. Okay, and what I'll do next is see where I'm at on the loudness, in the loudness realm. We're doing pretty well. We need to get a little bit more headroom here. Our true peak is still at minus 5.5, and I need somewhere around, 8 or 9 dB of additional headroom. So what I've got to do is I've got to squeeze out a little bit more. And mostly I think it's going to be these things right here. So again, it's going to be the transients. So let's come back into our compressor here. This time, let's go. Now here I can compress a little bit harder this time. And I can go to minus, we could probably keep it at minus 13. Yeah, right around there. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to bump this ratio to 4:1, because again, I need to get these transients under control, so I have that headroom. Let's go ahead and process. Okay, take that away, see where we are now. Go back into loudness. All right, now I have 8.6 dB, so I'm ready to drop this overall loudness to minus 19.5 is what I'm going to do. Process that. See where we end up there. Okay, there we go. That's looking pretty good. We didn't, we compressed it enough so that we're not, with the limiter, we're not chopping off any of the transients here. Got everything pretty tidy looking there, so we'll send that back to Audition. Let's see, effects, bring that back in, apply. Okay, there it comes back from RX. Now what I'll do is I'm not going to actually go run through the rest of it, but that's the general idea there. So once I convert it to stereo, it'll be minus 16.5 LUFS in terms of overall loudness, and we're pretty well set to go. So that's the order, Domingo, that I typically do my processing in. I hope that's helpful for you. The reason I do, for example, the de-essing pretty early on is I found that algorithm works best when you have the audio somewhere in the minus 24 to minus 26 LUFS loudness range. It just does a really nice job detecting the breaths and reducing them. So that's why I do that there. I fix the asymmetry of the waveforms first, because then I know exactly how much headroom I have. If I do, then after I do those two things, then I may do the noise reduction if I need it. I don't always do noise reduction. Again, only if you need it. Never do anything that you don't have to do. Well, generally don't do anything you don't have to do. I actually did some EQ there that probably wasn't necessary, and I would back that out if I were normally working on it. Got to keep the pace going here, though, because we're doing a learning session. But that's that in essence, that's what I do. And it really comes down to experimenting and testing things and seeing how it works. So just so you know, that's how I generally do my processing in order of operations. So I hope that helps a little bit. Let's switch back over to the questions. Domingo, thanks for that question. Edward Nixon, Curtis, I hope this didn't come through earlier today. We're in the middle of rewiring and the power's a bit iffy. My question is, how do I learn a microphone? Is there a heuristic or procedure that gets you to the optimal workflow? Hope this makes sense. Thanks for your efforts, Ed. Ed, that's a good question. I think that just comes with experience. You have to use your ears. You need to know your monitors, whatever it is you're monitoring on, well enough to know exactly how that sound is going to translate to other monitors. So what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, there's got to be some audio out there that you know well, whether it be some dialogue, a clip of dialogue audio. And what I would recommend is you take that audio and you play it back on lots of different things. Play it on your hi-fi system if you've got one. Play it in your car. Play it on any headphones you've got. Play it on your earbuds that go with your smartphone. Play it in your spouse or girlfriend's car or whatever, or boyfriend's car, and just get to know how all the different sound systems respond to the same exact audio file. And you'll start to understand how it translates across them, so that when you go back to your monitors, whatever those may be, whether they be near-field monitors or whether they be headphones like this, you'll have a sense for what they tend to emphasize and what they tend to de-emphasize. So that's the first thing. Once you've got a good sense on that, then you can start to kind of understand microphones as well. And frankly, it's going to come down to experimentation, and it's going to come down to making some mistakes. You may choose the wrong microphone in some circumstances. Hopefully you can do that when you're testing and not when you're in a critical shoot. But my main heuristic is I do as much testing as I can beforehand to see how it responds to different voices. If you've got friends or family members that are willing to do, voice tests with you and do test recordings, I would do as many of those as you can, because what you'll start to find is certain microphones tend to be very sibilant. So you'll know, okay, I know this is a sibilant, this microphone tends to emphasize sibilance, not something that's necessarily going to want to use. If I have an option, it's not one I'm going to want to use with someone who has a very bright, sibilant voice. Some mics tend to be a little bit darker. This Electro Voice RE20 can tend to be that way. By darker, I mean it has a lot of low end to it, and you may not want to use that on a person who has a darker voice. In that case, the mic that emphasizes sibilance may be a better choice for someone with a dark voice. That's generally going to be men, but it depends. And honestly, when you're getting ready to record someone, if you have the luxury, what you can do is try a couple different mics, or even boom a couple of different mics. And as they're kind of rehearsing, you can listen to each of them and decide which one sounds better. So I hope that helps a little bit. That's, it's not super concrete there, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of something to work with there. All right, Carlos Quintero asks a question here. And Carlos, thanks for your question. I actually subscribe to your YouTube channel. I really like it. You do some great stuff. And by the way, I do think that for those of you that don't know, Carlos, I believe, is a Canon XC10 shooter. That's a camera that got a lot of bad rap when it first came out about last year. I think it's actually a pretty neat camera. I've actually shot with it and helped do a review with a friend of mine. And I believe, Carlos, you shoot with that. And I'm with you. I think it's a pretty decent camera. His question, can the questions cover mixing too? Of course. If so, I have a recurring challenge, matching sound between setups as in office versus conference room. While working on corporate video productions, we often shoot in multiple locations within the company, and oftentimes it is the same voice through the walkthrough portion. I find myself spending quite a bit of time in post to help standardize the texture of the voice, or maybe the pitch. I strive toward the standard sound of a TV show or what we see in cinema, and where the final mix allows the voice to sound crisp and consistent throughout the show or production. So any ideas, guidance, or insight that could help plan, prep, or aid in the approach towards sound capture would be highly appreciated. So, well, that is a good question, Carlos, and a complex one. First of all, I think you want to get to know your microphones. And you probably already know this and probably do this, so I may be preaching to the choir, so I apologize in advance if that's the case, but you probably want to find a set of microphones that cut well together if you are going to be having to use different microphones. So for example, if during an interview you're booming some sort of cardioid mic, and then in a walking section you've got the person laved up. What I'm finding is that my Sanken COS 11D lavalier microphone actually cuts pretty nicely with certain boom microphones. And so I think it's partly a matter of figuring that out. And we'll be doing a review on that Sanken COS 11 at some point here, but that cuts pretty nicely with my Audio-Technica 4053B, which is typically what I'm going to boom when I'm shooting indoors. Not as well with some of my Rode shotgun microphones. So I'm still got to kind of work on that. But ideally, if you can find two mics that cut nicely together during production, probably best to start with those. It's going to save you a lot of time in post. Secondly, if you do have to address it in post, RX is expensive. Again, I know this is an example of where this becomes really, really nice. They have this EQ match feature, which is really cool. So you can actually get an EQ profile from one microphone and audio clip, and apply it to a second one, and it kind of automatically figures out how to apply an EQ curve and get one mic to sound a whole lot more like the other mic. So that's an example of the kind of things that Audition doesn't have that RX has. That's really cool. I don't know if you have the budget for that, but there's an option to consider. If you don't have that option and you're working on Audition, or you're working directly in Premiere or some other editing app, you may just have to learn to manually apply that EQ. And you can get kind of a starting place and actually save it as a preset. So for example, if you're in here and you apply, let's see here, parametric equalizer, and you come up with some profile where you do some test shots or test recordings with the two mics that you're going to be using during production, you can kind of create your own EQ profile here that will kind of at least give you a head start. It's kind of like using a LUT on a camera. It's not perfect always, but it can kind of be a nice starting point from which to work, and then you won't have to do as much work in post. So I would do some test recordings in a decent recording space, or maybe in an office, and kind of get the two in the exact same space for both microphones, and then just create an EQ curve here for to get them to sound similar. And again, once you've done that, you can save that as a preset here, and that can give you kind of a head start. So I hope that's helpful for you, Carlos. I wish it were easier, but there are some thoughts there. All right. Thanks again for that question. The last question from Mark Latani. Mark, if you have a few moments to comment on recording a piano on an artificial ice floe in the Arctic Ocean would be interesting. Well, thanks for that, Mark. I actually did go and see this piece. If you haven't seen it, it's kind of an interesting piece. It's over on the Google Plus site, my Google Plus page. So if you're interested in seeing that, it's interesting. There was I believe he's this Scandinavian composer, but they put him out on a little artificial ice floe out in the Arctic Ocean, and he played one of the pieces he composed, and it was beautiful. And when they mic'd it, the only thing I could really tell from the recording was they had what looked like a single shotgun microphone with a furry windshield on it, and that's all I know. Other thing I know, I inferred from the fact that the pianist was not wearing gloves and was not wearing a hat that it was probably the warmer part of the season in the Arctic. So they weren't doing it in the absolute coldest part of the year there. So that probably helped a little bit as well. But yeah, there are definitely issues that can arise when you're operating in very cold environments or very hot environments, very humid environments. And so deserts are another thing where there's all sorts of sand everywhere. So there are lots of challenges in different places. But I think what they did here, first of all, they did one thing that was kind of interesting. They recorded the piano with a single shotgun microphone. That's a little bit unusual. First of all, you don't typically use shotgun microphones. In this case, they were outdoors, and so that's what the mixer had. I guess I don't know what their thinking was exactly about that, but it did a nice recording. It was a single microphone. That's another thing that was kind of unique. Typically, when you're recording piano, you'll use a stereo pair. They chose to go with a single microphone. Again, I don't know what went into that decision, but it seems to have worked pretty nicely. And again, I don't know what was inside that windshield. It could have been a cardioid of some sort, or maybe even an omnidirectional mic. I'm not sure. A lot of times, actually, in a studio, they will use a stereo pair of omnidirectional mics to mic a piano. Anyway, they made a great recording. I'm envious that they got to go do that. I would have loved to have gone and done that. But another thing that's important too is that your microphone needs to be immune to those types of circumstances. One thought on the high end, the Schoeps microphones, I have heard from a number of mixers. I haven't worked with them a lot myself, but from the other people I have talked to, is that the Schoeps CMC's MK641, which is a very common one that's used indoors for dialogue capture, tends to be a little bit persnickety in high humidity, just because of the way it works. So I have heard people complain about that. Same with their new shotgun microphone. I believe some people have said in high humidity that could be problematic. I don't know what the humidity was like in the Arctic when they shot that, but that'd be one consideration. And then there are also considerations like recorders in particular with the batteries in them. When they're out in the cold, they run down very quickly. So they may have had to have some sort of solution on that as well. And I would just take my audio bag and wrap it up as much as I could and not take it out until we're ready to actually start recording. Keep it somewhere warm until you have to take it out is another consideration there. So those are some of my kind of rookie thoughts on that, I guess. So thanks everyone for the different comments. They were really cool, really great questions and comments. I appreciate those. We'll see if we do some more of these in the future. And until then, go ahead and get out there and make some great recordings. We'll talk to you later.